Rashid Al-Saqar was a billionaire sheikh who owned islands, yachts, and empires. But on the night of his wedding, he destroyed everything with a single act of violence. Aaravi Joshi, a bright and graceful Indian bride, believed she was marrying into a life of luxury, unaware that one buried secret would seal her fate before sunrise. Their names would soon dominate headlines. Not for a fairy tale romance, but for a chilling murder that exposed the darkness hidden behind wealth and power. Rashid Al-Saqar was no ordinary man. At 43, he had built an empire that stretched across continents, with assets ranging from oil fields in Texas to luxury resorts in Dubai and casinos in Monaco. He was powerful, elusive, and fiercely private. To the public, he was known simply as the Desert Falcon, a nickname coined by tabloids after he purchased a $75 million penthouse shaped like a falcon's wingspan in downtown Miami. Despite all the wealth and grandeur surrounding him, Rashid remained a solitary figure, often attending high-profile galas alone or arriving with anonymous guests who were never seen again. He had no known children, no past marriages, and no emotional scandals. This made it all the more shocking when he announced his intention to marry. The woman he chose was someone no one expected, Aaravi Kulkarni, a 24-year-old Indian model from Mumbai, who had grown up in a two-room flat with her widowed mother and younger sister. She was known in the local modeling circuit but had never broken into the mainstream fashion world. Her social media presence was modest, and her life was filled with small shoots, traditional festivals, and quiet evenings. When news broke of her engagement to the reclusive billionaire, it created an uproar in both Indian and international circles. How had this unknown woman managed to capture the heart of one of the world's most powerful men? Their meeting was orchestrated by a luxury matchmaking agency called Global Heirloom, a discreet firm that catered exclusively to ultra-rich clients looking for women who fit traditional standards of beauty and virtue. Aaravi was scouted through a talent agent who offered her an opportunity to meet a client interested in finding a wife from a culturally rich background. The offer came at a time when her family was drowning in debt, her modeling jobs were drying up, and her younger sister needed surgery. She agreed to one video interview, curious and desperate. What followed was a whirlwind. Rashid watched her during the interview through a darkened screen. She couldn't see his face, but he asked several questions about her upbringing, beliefs, and romantic history. She kept her answers vague, presenting herself as modest, spiritual, and traditional. She wore a simple kurti and avoided eye contact as she spoke. Something about her composure and tone appealed to Rashid, and within days, he proposed a face-to-face meeting in Dubai. There, she was treated like royalty. Everything from her travel to her outfits was arranged by Rashid's team. She met him, only twice in person before the wedding date was fixed. Both meetings were brief and formal. She was instructed not to ask questions and to accept the terms of the union, a clause-heavy contract that included lifestyle restrictions, non-disclosure agreements, and behavior expectations. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on Rashid's private island estate, Al-Saqar Haven, a lush paradise surrounded by white sand and crystal blue waters. Invitations were sent to only 50 guests, business moguls, royalty, and celebrities. No one from Aaravi's family was flown in, though they were promised a generous dowry in exchange for privacy. She wore a handcrafted gown infused with diamonds, from Antwerp and gold thread from Istanbul. The ceremony itself was silent and surreal, with a heavy presence of guards and media control. Drones hovered above, capturing cinematic shots while security ensured no footage leaked to the public. Rashid stood still throughout the ceremony, his face unreadable behind his designer sunglasses. Aaravi, for all her poise, looked overwhelmed. She smiled on cue, posed for pictures, and nodded politely at dignitaries. But beneath the makeup and jewels, her eyes carried fear, like someone being led into the unknown. She had tried to call her sister before the ceremony but found her phone had been disabled by Rashid's team. She was told it was temporary, just for security. She felt increasingly isolated but dared not protest. The contract she had signed stated that she was to maintain absolute discretion or risk severe legal consequences. By the time the guests had toasted to their future and fireworks lit up the night sky, Aaravi was no longer the girl from Mumbai. She was now the bride of Rashid Al-Saqar, trapped in a world of wealth, power, and silent expectations. What awaited her behind those mansion walls was a mystery no one could have imagined. The night after the grand wedding was expected to be a celebration of intimacy, a moment where two people began their life together in privacy and warmth. But for Rashid Al-Saqar, the wedding night held a different kind of significance. It was a moment of judgment. He had grown up with deeply embedded ideas of honor and purity, beliefs passed down through generations of conservative lineage. While he lived in the modern world and did business with progressive minds, his personal code remained rigid and unbending. In his eyes, a bride was meant to arrive in his life untouched, both in spirit and body. It wasn't love he had sought from Aaravi, it was possession, unspoiled, obedient, and permanent. Anything short of that would be a violation of his legacy. The honeymoon suite, perched on the highest floor of the mansion, overlooked the island's coastline. The room was decorated with red roses, silk bedding, and golden chandeliers. But behind the opulence, tension filled the air. The staff noticed that Rashid did not appear excited or affectionate as the evening began. He instructed everyone to leave the upper floor and ensure complete privacy. Aaravi, dressed in an expensive bridal robe, waited inside the suite, unsure of what to expect. What happened in the following hours remained a mystery to the outside world. No one heard screams, no glass was broken, and no alarms were triggered. But by dawn, everything had changed. Rashid walked out of the suite just after 5 a.m., his appearance unsettling. His shirt was partially unbuttoned, his face flushed and hollow, and his eyes wide with something between rage and despair. He gave no explanation to the staff, only instructing his personal assistant to shut down communications on the island. The estate went into an unscheduled lockdown, with all workers confined to their quarters and guards posted at every exit. Meanwhile, Aaravi was nowhere to be seen. Her luggage was removed from the suite and her personal belongings were destroyed. When one housekeeper asked about her, she was immediately reassigned to a different estate. By noon, Rashid held a private press briefing on the island. A carefully worded statement was released claiming that Aaravi had abandoned the marriage of her own free will, due to personal reasons, and had returned to an undisclosed location. He requested privacy and urged the media to respect their family's wishes. The statement was short and cold. No photos of Aaravi leaving the estate were released. No plane tickets were booked under her name, and no one saw her board a boat or helicopter. Despite the public announcement, people on the island whispered. One security officer confided to a colleague that he had seen Rashid toss something into the fireplace shortly after leaving the suite. Another worker claimed to have noticed dark stains on the bathroom marble floor before it was professionally cleaned. Still, no one dared to question Rashid. He was known for rewarding loyalty and destroying disobedience. His reach extended far, beyond Miami. He had friends in embassies, private intelligence, and even law enforcement. Challenging him was not just risky, it was suicidal. Back in Mumbai, Aaravi's family grew increasingly desperate. Her mother tried to contact Rashid's representatives, but all messages bounced back. The money they were promised never arrived. Her younger sister sent multiple emails, begging for any update. A week later, they received a message written in legal language stating that Aaravi had chosen to disconnect from all previous relations for her mental well-being and privacy. The letter was signed electronically with Aaravi's name, but her family knew she would never abandon them voluntarily. They suspected foul play but had no power to pursue it. Unbeknownst to the family, someone else had taken an interest in Aaravi's disappearance. Her cousin Vihan Joshi, a tech-savvy journalism student, began digging. He noticed that her social media had gone completely dark after the wedding. Her phone was no longer traceable. Her last WhatsApp message to her sister was time-stamped just hours before the wedding, saying, "Something doesn't feel right." Vihan saved the message. It became the seed of suspicion that would grow into a full-blown investigation. But, for now, the world remained blind to what had happened on that island, where luxury concealed the darkest truths and silence protected the man who held all the power. Vihan Joshi couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Every time he looked at the last message from Aaravi, her words played like an alarm in his mind. He knew his cousin well. She had always been skeptical, cautious, and never impulsive. For her to vanish without a single call or video message to her mother or sister was not just unusual. It was terrifying. As the days stretched into weeks, Vihan began piecing together a timeline of events, starting with her recruitment by the matchmaking agency. He contacted the talent agent who had originally introduced Aaravi to Global Heirloom, but the number was disconnected. Their website was still active, yet every inquiry form bounced back with a generic error message. There were no contact numbers, no office addresses, and the listed business license linked to a dissolved entity in the Cayman Islands. Vihan's background in digital journalism gave him access to tools and forums beyond the reach of everyday users. He started scouring deep web directories, business registries, and encrypted forums. It wasn't long before he discovered that Global Heirloom had been mentioned in other missing persons discussions online. A young woman from Eastern Europe had vanished after signing with them, and another from the Philippines was reportedly last seen at a private resort belonging to a wealthy client. No arrests, no headlines, just rumors buried in obscure threads, and unresolved Reddit posts. These cases, scattered across time and geography, had one common element: ultra-wealthy men who operated outside normal legal boundaries. Back in Miami, Rashid Al-Saqar maintained his usual life of excess and order. Publicly, he returned to business, attending charity events and making media appearances to present an image of composure. Privately, he was unraveling. The wedding night had destroyed his illusion. According to Rashid's deeply ingrained beliefs, discovering that Aaravi was not a virgin amounted to betrayal. Though no one knew exactly what had happened in that room, those closest to him noticed his mood swing into something darker. His temper, already severe, grew unpredictable. Staff were fired over minor mistakes. Entire departments were replaced. He installed new surveillance systems throughout his properties and stopped sleeping in the same room 2 nights in a row. It was as though guilt and paranoia had merged into one. Yet Rashid underestimated the quiet force gathering against him. Vihan continued to investigate. He hacked into archived airline databases and located a private jet that departed from Al-Saqar, Haven, the day after the wedding. The manifest listed only one passenger, Rashid himself. No trace of Aaravi. He then tracked supply shipments made to the island around the wedding date and found an unusual order: industrial-grade cleaning chemicals shipped under the name of a shell company. The order was placed one day before the wedding and marked urgent. Vihan saved everything: screenshots, PDFs, tracking logs. Still, he had no proof of a crime, only a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Then came the unexpected break. An anonymous email arrived in Vihan's inbox with a subject line that simply read, "She's not the first." Attached was a short video file, grainy but clear. It showed a hidden camera feed from what appeared to be a bedroom with marble, floors, and gold curtains, almost identical to the description of Rashid's honeymoon suite. A woman, not Aaravi, was in the video, visibly distressed, arguing with someone off-screen. The clip ended with her sobbing into a pillow. The metadata: On the file was traced back to a private server in Luxembourg. Vihan couldn't verify the woman's identity, but the implication was chilling. Rashid had done this before. Fueled by the new evidence, Vihan reached out to international journalists, framing his findings as part of a larger exposé on billionaire, abuse rings, and the shadowy matchmaking world. He used pseudonyms and encrypted emails, fearing retaliation. The story began to gain traction online, with whispers of Aaravi's name re-emerging in forums and social media posts. People started asking questions. Where was she? Why had she disappeared so suddenly? And why were others who interacted with Rashid through Global Heirloom also missing? As the pressure built, Rashid grew more isolated. He tightened his security even further, banning visitors, interrogating his staff, and traveling only under heavy disguise. His once flawless empire was beginning to crack, not from outside enemies, but from the ghost of a young Indian bride who refused to be forgotten. What began as a quiet wedding had spiraled into a dangerous unraveling, and Vihan knew he was only just scratching the surface. The storm surrounding Rashid Al-Saqar's life was no longer silent. What began as murmurs on obscure forums had now leaked into mainstream awareness. Several global news outlets picked up Vihan's findings, under the headline, "Missing Indian Bride, Linked to Shadowy Billionaire Matchmaking Network." Though Rashid was never directly accused, investigative journalists speculated about the pattern of disappearances and the disturbing similarities between cases involving women recruited by Global Heirloom. Images of Aaravi, smiling in her bridal dress just days before her disappearance, spread across the internet. Her photo became a symbol of wealth-fueled exploitation, and public outrage brewed. Rashid, however, acted quickly. His legal team issued takedown requests, threats of defamation lawsuits, and aggressive cease-and-desist letters. Websites were forced to remove articles. Some journalists backed off, unwilling to challenge the might of a billionaire with international reach. But others persisted, feeding Vihan more information from their side. A former employee of the island estate, hiding in a small town in Central America, reached out anonymously. She confirmed that the lockdown after the wedding had been unusual, and described seeing staff members burn several bags of belongings under Rashid's orders. She also reported that no one had seen Aaravi after the wedding night, not even to collect her passport. Vihan documented everything. His wall was covered in printouts, maps, timestamps, and theories connecting every piece of evidence. He still lacked physical proof of Aaravi's fate, but a breakthrough came when he located a digital trail tied to the deleted surveillance footage from the island mansion. With help from a hacker collective that sympathized with his cause, Vihan recovered fragments of footage stored on a cloud backup server Rashid's team had failed to fully wipe. The clips were incomplete, only seconds long, but what they revealed was enough to shake Vihan. One frame showed Rashid walking away from the honeymoon suite, shirtless and bloodstained. Another showed a glimpse of a limp hand trailing from a large silk curtain on the balcony floor, its henna fading. Knowing this couldn't be shared lightly, Vihan packaged the information into a digital dossier and sent it to a high-profile human rights organization based in Geneva. The organization, already monitoring wealthy individuals suspected of trafficking or abuse, took immediate interest. A private investigation was opened, and the case was filed with Interpol under a confidential threat assessment category. Suddenly, Rashid found himself shadowed, not by local law enforcement, but by global scrutiny that he couldn't simply silence with money. Despite his public calm, Rashid was unraveling in private. He had become increasingly paranoid, convinced that Aaravi's spirit was haunting him. He banned all reflective surfaces from his estate, claiming they trapped voices. Several staff members reported hearing him talk to himself at night, or scream in his sleep. He commissioned spiritual advisors and exorcists from 3 different countries. Nothing worked. His business partners noticed his erratic behavior and quietly began to distance themselves, The empire he had spent 2 decades building was beginning to fracture under invisible pressure. Meanwhile, back in India, Aaravi's family had grown stronger in their grief. Her mother, once afraid of speaking publicly, now joined protests and awareness campaigns against international bride trafficking. The family's story, once ignored, was now being echoed on every major platform. A candlelight vigil held in Mumbai drew thousands, with pictures of Aaravi held up high as chants for justice echoed into the night. As more attention mounted, new witnesses began stepping forward. A former yacht captain who had once worked for Rashid admitted to ferrying nervous young women to the private island in the past. He claimed one of them resembled Aaravi, and that she had pleaded to return before the staff was instructed to silence all concerns. These confessions, combined with Vihan's digital evidence, formed a damning timeline that couldn't be ignored. Even with his influence, Rashid was now under watch. A sealed subpoena was issued by an international tribunal. His estate in Miami was placed under surveillance. His private island was quietly raided by investigators posing as environmental researchers. Still, no body was found. Aaravi's physical presence remained lost, but her story, driven by one cousin's obsession and a rising global movement, had gained unstoppable momentum. Rashid, once untouchable, now lived in a glass cage, each step monitored, each secret leaking slowly into the world. Months passed, but the fire around Aaravi Joshi's disappearance never cooled. The case had evolved beyond a personal tragedy and become a global symbol of justice denied by wealth. What began as a quiet disappearance had triggered a movement, too large to be ignored. Rashid Al-Saqar, once protected by layers of power, was increasingly isolated as cracks formed in every corner of his empire. A growing list of former employees, silent victims, and corporate partners now spoke with investigators. The spotlight that once adored Rashid had turned into a searing beam of accountability. Despite his team's efforts to contain the fallout, Rashid's name was now synonymous with suspicion. International human rights groups demanded formal charges. Protesters gathered outside his Miami estate and business offices with signs bearing Aaravi's face. His international bank accounts were quietly frozen as authorities probed links to criminal offshore operations. Government officials in multiple countries began to reevaluate the legality of matchmaking companies that operated without oversight. Global Heirloom vanished from the internet altogether, but its digital fingerprints remained. Vihan had made sure every cache was saved, every profile backed up. He released a public report detailing a network of wealthy men exploiting women under the guise of luxurious marriage offers. Aaravi's story was the centerpiece. Still, Vihan had one mission left. He didn't want symbolism. He wanted the truth. Every day, he scanned satellite imagery, tracked shipping records, and consulted ocean current maps in hopes of discovering any trace of Aaravi's body. One day, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A freelance drone photographer working near an uncharted reef not far from Al-Saqar Haven captured footage of wreckage scattered along the coastline of a forbidden section of the island. He had uploaded the footage to a drone enthusiast forum, unaware of its connection. Vihan recognized one object in the wreckage immediately, the same red lehenga Aaravi wore at her wedding reception. Its fabric, tangled around sharp coral, had patches of henna-stained silk. Authorities acted swiftly. A specialized team arrived at the island under the pretense of an environmental survey, but were really forensic divers and investigators. In a hidden cove beneath a limestone cliff, they discovered a shallow grave, cleverly masked by driftwood and stone. The remains inside were consistent with a petite woman. Alongside her were gold bangles, partially burned wedding documents, and shards of broken ceramic with traces of blood. Dental records matched through the Indian embassy confirmed what Vihan had feared for months. It was Aaravi. Her body had finally been found. The world reacted with fury. Headlines roared across every major news network. Billionaire Rashid Al-Saqar, implicated in murder of Indian bride. With evidence now undeniable, an international warrant was issued for Rashid's arrest. But he had vanished. His private jet never left the runway. His homes were abandoned. His phones went dark. It was as if he had dissolved into thin air. Speculation exploded. Some claimed he fled to a private bunker in the desert. Others believed he faked his death and escaped on a yacht. Rumors even suggested a betrayal within his own circle, fearing the wrath his presence would bring. Interpol launched a global manhunt, and bounty rewards were offered. But the true focus remained on Aaravi. Her body was returned to India, where a state funeral was held. Thousands attended. Leaders from women's rights organizations, media, and even political figures paid tribute. Aaravi had become more than a victim. She was a voice for silenced women around the world. Her name was etched into the walls of new legislation aimed at regulating cross-border matchmaking and penalizing exploitative marriage brokers. Vihan stood at her gravesite, exhausted, but proud. The journey had cost him dearly: sleep, security, and the peaceful innocence of life before her disappearance. But he had kept his promise. He had found her. Justice was no longer an idea. It was a process that had been set in motion. Though Rashid remained at large, he was no longer invincible. His wealth couldn't buy shadows thick enough to hide in forever. Aaravi's story would never fade. It lived in courtrooms, in classrooms, in new laws, and in the hearts of countless others who saw her strength in their own pain. And someday, when Rashid was finally found, the world would remember not just how Aaravi died, but how she changed everything.